Honey, come downstairs. Your dad's home. My mum's voice calling out such an ordinary and familiar phrase enveloped me in a sense of comfort, like the feeling of pulling a warm blanket up to your chin on a cold night. Instinctively, I swung my legs off the bed to get up, but as my feet hit the floor, I felt the cool wood send a shock through my whole body, turning the blanket to ice. Dad. I blinked. Did I hear that right? Blinked again. Checked the time. Pinched my arm. Nope. Definitely awake. My eyes flicked to the framed photo on my bedside table. My gaze lingering on the smiling face of my dad, with his arms wrapped around my grinning 10-year-old self. My chest tightened, my heart gripped by the unforgiving hand of grief. The same hand that's had a hold on me for 6 years, ever since the day we lost my dad. I sat frozen on the edge of my bed, certain I'd imagined it. The output of an overworked and overtired brain filling in the blanks of the odd misheard word, resulting in an entirely different meaning to what was actually said. Surely. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady as I replied. What? Mum? The breath hadn't helped. I winced at the far from subtle crack in my voice. Your dad's come home. Isn't it amazing? I felt my heart rate quicken in tandem with my brows pulling together. Confusion quickly gave way to concern as I heard the excitement that saturated my mum's words. Unmoved from my position, I made a mental check that I still had the family counselor's number saved in my phone, Dr. Finner, I believed. I'd never liked her myself, but she seemed to do a lot of good for Mum in those first couple of years. Unbidden, my thoughts drifted back to that time. My heart squeezed again at the memory of the lost look on my mother's face as she set the table for free, or made 2 cups of tea in the morning, her grief-stricken mind unable to accept a world without her other half. I blinked away the tears that sprung to my eyes at the thought of her returning to that state. I was pulled from my brooding by the sound of footsteps on the stairs, trying to still myself enough to have sufficient strength for my mum and myself before she reached my bedroom. As the door swung open, my heart nearly broke all over again when I saw the pure joy in my mother's eyes. Mum? It took 2 attempts to get the word out, the first too weak to make it past the lump in my throat. It's a miracle, isn't it? I always knew this would happen. I knew he'd come back to us one day. I tried to tell you. I tried to tell them all. Even when you all told me I was wrong, told me I was crazy. Even his parents, his own brother. Everyone else gave up on him. But I always knew. Her delight spilled out of her in a torrent of words. Words that faded in my ears as I tried once again in vain to swallow down the mass of barbed wire and broken glass in the back of my throat. She'd made so much progress. After fruitlessly waiting for a gap in my mother's rambling, I gently cut her off as I slowly rose on trembling legs, afraid she would break apart completely if I moved too suddenly. Mum, Dad's not with us anymore, remember? She gave me that look, The one she would give me when I was 6 years old and sat at the kitchen table after school, confidently telling her of the fairies that lived at the bottom of the playground. And they definitely were there, because Stephanie said she saw them that one time, and that I just had to take all our jam jars in tomorrow so I could bring them home, and we'd have our own fairies. It was a look of pity, of sympathy, of wanting to correct my mistakes without hurting my feelings. But I wasn't mistaken. This time, I was the one in the difficult position of letting the one you love down gently, like trying to guide a bubble to the ground without it popping. I stepped into the spike-studded soles of those shoes, flushing out the bitterness of my tongue with the same love and patience she had shown me all those years ago. Mum, he's not back. He's not coming back. Dad's dead. Mum, I'm sorry. I know how much it hurts. I miss him so much too, but you have to remember. This was as far as I got before every cell of my body, every fiber of my very being, turned to stone, solidified in an instant by a voice. "What are you talking about, Tiger?" I couldn't breathe. I felt the world spinning around me as I heard those words. That voice I knew so well. That nickname I'd had to accept I'd never hear again. It couldn't be. Dad? I barely recognized my own voice as it crawled from between my frozen lips. This wasn't right. My dad was dead. The night we got the call still infected my dreams. Flashes of the police station, waiting outside the morgue for Mum as she identified the body. We buried him. But he stood there, in the doorway, lopsided smile on his lips, looking just how I remembered he did. Or were his eyes always this dark? Was he always that pale? I couldn't get my thoughts together. I could almost physically feel my life as I knew it slipping away from my grasp. Feel my hold on reality itself sliding through my fingers like silk. I couldn't think, couldn't breathe. My last clear memory of that day is the feeling of falling back towards the bed, seeing the looks of concern on both my parents' faces as my mind warred with itself over whether to feel overwhelming joy or pure, unfiltered terror. That was 2 weeks ago. I wish I'd held on to that joy while I had even some of it. I barely left my room the first few days. Mum and Dad fell straight back into married life. And sometimes I could almost pretend as if everything was normal and nothing had happened. But this wasn't my dad. Something just wasn't right about him. Mum couldn't seem to see it. But he'd always be slightly too tall, too thin. His features would be too large or his skin too tight. It was difficult to pinpoint what exactly was off about him, but he wasn't ever quite Dad. Not to mention how he'd conveniently disappear whenever someone visited the house. The first time, it was my uncle, Dad's brother. I tried to mention the situation in conversation, but my uncle just looked at me with poorly disguised concern for my mental state, and Mum just quickly moved the conversation along, not even sparing me a glance. I never tried to bring it up with anyone again after that. I mean, how could I? What could I say that wouldn't make me seem like I was losing my sanity? It was midway through the second week when I tried leaving the house, and when I realized that this thing wearing my dad's face wouldn't let me leave. I dared to venture from the relative sanctuary of my bedroom to attend a birthday party my friend was having a few streets over. But as I came down the stairs, I found him there at the bottom, standing in the hallway, staring at me, a smile plastered on his face that was just a little too wide. "You can't be going out now, Tiger. I've made dinner for us." He stretched out an arm that was slightly too long to indicate the dinner table, where my mum sat eating. 2 places sat beside her with the plates of food ready and waiting. I tried to swallow the tears that threatened to fall when I saw her. She'd been looking worse by the day, her cheeks hollowing and the bags under her eyes darkening. They almost looked black now. I turned my gaze back to the thing that wasn't my dad in front of me, and attempted to stammer out an explanation of wanting to attend the party to wish my friend a happy birthday. My efforts were met with stony silence. He continued to stand there, arm extended, that smile still on his face. I don't think I could even see him breathing. I retreated to my room after that, sputtering an excuse about not feeling well and not wanting to upset my stomach. I took the stairs backwards, not wanting to take my eyes off whatever this thing was. He didn't move a muscle as I backed away. I never even saw him blink. I didn't leave my room after that, except when absolutely necessary, to grab food from the fridge to take back to my sanctuary. I tried to go at night, when I expected them to be asleep, but he was always there. He'd be in the kitchen, or sitting in the living room with a book open on his lap, no matter what the time was. The same book, every time. I tried not to notice that he never turned the page. I felt completely lost on what to do. I spent my days feeling like a piece of prey, a tiny rabbit trembling in my poorly defended burrow, while an unnatural beast prowled outside. I barely slept, and the few hours I could manage were fitful. My dreams plagued by incomprehensible figures with eyes so full of malice, I felt I was choking when I met their gaze. I lived as a ghost, perpetually stuck in limbo, with no way out. That all changed yesterday. I woke in the morning, just after 11 a.m., and something felt different. I sat up, gradually returning to full consciousness as I tried to muddle through the cobwebs in my mind to put my finger on what was wrong. It was too quiet. My stomach fell away through the floor, dread wrapping its cold fingers around my windpipe. Mum was a morning person, always had been. By this time, she would have been up for hours, busying herself around the house with one thing or another. I strained my ears until my head ached, desperately searching for the clattering of dishes, the sound of the radio. Nothing. Why is there nothing? The seconds seemed to stretch out into eternity, my pattering heartbeat echoing in my ears, far too loud in the silence. I willed my feet to move, trying to kick my body into gear to find answers to the question that terrified me so much. After far too long, I managed to slowly ease myself up, wincing at every creak and shift that echoed louder than I wanted it to. I cracked open the door, attempts to stifle my ragged breathing, never quite succeeding. The house was dark, despite the fact I could see bright sunlight through the small gap in my bedroom curtains. All the upstairs rooms were unoccupied. So, with the chasm of dread in my stomach widening impossibly further, I turned my attention to the staircase. The path down the stairs looked more formidable than ever before, and I paused at the top for longer than I'd care to admit. Every step I took, as I eventually made my descent, sent a fresh chill down my spine, the continued absence of any signs of life making my heart pound harder with every stair. By the time I reached the floor, it felt almost bruised, like a bird slamming itself frantically against the cage bars that were my ribs. The kitchen door was open, but the curtains inside were drawn and the lights off. I crept to the doorway, and the incessant fluttering of my heart seemed to freeze as I saw him at the kitchen table, sitting there in the dark, watching me, that same smile on his face. Did he have too many teeth?
"Morning, Tiger. How did you sleep?"
Words failed me as I stared back at him, fear refusing to ease its hold on my vocal cords. I'm not sure his mouth even moved in the dark. Only the sound of my strained breath filled the silence between us, as my gaze flitted desperately around the room, looking for something, anything to ease my worries. Where was she? At last I couldn't take it anymore, and I voiced the question spinning through my mind. The words grated through my teeth, barely more than a whisper. "Where's Mum?" His stare was unrelenting, smile never wavering for a second.
"Morning, Tiger. How did you sleep?"
My vision blurred. From tears or fright, I'm not sure. I backed slowly from the room, unwilling to take my eyes from the threat for even a second. Where is she? The desperation dripped from my words like the tears down my face as I backed down the hallway, those same words following me like a deadly pursuer, as I finally turned and started running from room to room in a futile attempt to find my one last connection to something real, something ordinary, in the nightmare that had become my daily life.
"Morning, Tiger. How did you sleep?"
She wasn't there. She hadn't left the house in days on end. Why wasn't she here? I called for her like a newborn, my wails echoing against the walls of empty rooms, despair making its home in every bone in my body. I was alone in the house, nobody with which to seek solace from whatever was at my kitchen table, still sitting there, completely unmoving, as I confirmed when I eventually returned to the doorway of the kitchen. The tide of pure panic within me had been rising steadily, and I could feel myself sinking deeper into it, the surface receding from sight and taking the last of my strength with it. I couldn't stay here any longer. I backed out of the kitchen and turned, making for the stairs. Closed my eyes, breathed in, out, Another step. In. Out. Go. Before I could second guess myself, I threw myself past the bottom of the stairs and sprinted down the hall. I kept my focus trained on the handle and my path to it, allowing it to linger on what I'd do once I was out, or on whatever it was I could hear beginning to move after me on too many legs. Would risk a mistake I couldn't afford to make. Not when I was this close. The hallway had never felt so long in my life. But finally, one hand closed around the cool metal, the other twisting the lock. And then I was wrenching the door open and bursting into the outside world. I couldn't stop to savor my freedom. Couldn't take even a second to plan my next move. I just had to keep running. I don't know how long I ran for. I don't know where I ran, or why, or even how I managed to get the deep gash in my knee along the way. All that was in my mind was that I had to get away. I was nearly 2 towns over before I let myself stop. Or, more accurately, before my legs collapsed beneath me and I had to half crawl, half drag myself off the small back road and under the cover of some bushes. Ragged gasps of air clawed their way down my throat as I lay on my back, waiting for the world to stop spinning, numb to the sticks and rocks knifing into my spine. At some point, I resolved to head to my uncle's. He lived on the outskirts of the town I was nearing, and given that I couldn't feel my feet already, I wasn't adverse to the walk. Besides, where else could I go? It was getting dark, and the thought of being outside, exposed, and with limited vision, was not an appealing one. It did occur to me on the way there that my destination of choice was a predictable one. However, with my uncle believing my dad to be as dead as I did, he was hardly going to hand me over to someone, or something, that suddenly showed up looking like him, was he? I will stand by that judgment. My reasoning was sound. But as my uncle swung open the door, I was met not with the look of surprise at seeing me there I was expecting, but rather an expression of concern and barely concealed pity. I felt my heart start sinking already. He took a cautious step forward, raising his hands as if approaching a nervous animal. I saw the phone in his hand, and immediately suspected he'd been forewarned of my arrival. No. Please. Hey, love. It's okay. Just come inside for a minute, yeah? I took a step back to match his one forwards, feeling like I was locked in some dangerous dance I'd never agreed to participate in. Come on now. Your dad called. He's worried about you. No. All at once, my sinking heart decided to make an emergency U-turn and leapt into my throat, making me feel like I was going to be sick. Instead, what came out of my mouth was a shaky combination of a shout and a sob. What are you talking about? Dad's dead. He died, and you know this. You know. What is happening? What? The sobbing won out, and my voice died in my throat, and I watched the concern deepen on my uncle's face. He took another step toward me, and fear took charge of the controls in my brain, and I was running back down the drive before I'd even finished processing his movement. He shouted after me, but I couldn't stop to listen. Couldn't stop for anything. I spent most of the night alternating between running and walking. I couldn't remember a time I'd done this much exercise. It's amazing what a primal fear of death can do to your stamina. Even more so when that death is to be delivered by something so unnatural, something so wrong. I spent a couple of hours resting in a hollow tree trunk deep into the woods when I was too exhausted to keep going. I dozed off a couple of times, but every slight noise had me jerking awake, muscles tensed, and breathing way too fast. Sometime in the morning, I stopped at a petrol station to get a couple of sandwiches and as much water as I felt I could afford. Thankfully, I'd put on my jacket before leaving my room the day before, so I had some cash to survive, albeit a worryingly small amount. It crossed my mind to take a bus or train somewhere, but I didn't want to spend all of my meager funds on a ticket, and the thought of being in one vehicle with no exit for any significant length of time set my heart racing on its own. I've walked all day. I have no destination in mind, but every time I stop, I see whatever it was sitting at my kitchen table, wearing that smile that chills me to my core, and I keep going. I just want as much distance between me and it as possible. That brings me to here and now. I'm sitting in a small diner attached to another petrol station, tucked into a corner on the least visible table I could find, dining on a small starter and gulping down more water. As soon as I finish recording this, I will be running as fast and as far as I can. It's all I can think to do. But I don't think I'll last very long now. You see, as I was basically licking my plate clean of any remaining scraps, I heard my name spoken. Every muscle in my body froze, and I looked around in terror, dreading the sight of that goddamn smile again. But nobody had spoken it. It came from the TV. I felt shock and absolute terror seize hold of my limbs as I saw a photo of me posted up on the screen, overlaying footage of the thing claiming to be my dad, addressing the public imploringly, begging for help in bringing his beloved daughter back home. And standing there next to it was my mother. But it wasn't her. It was clear to me, even through the grainy quality of the cheap TV screen. Her limbs were slightly out of proportion, her movements just a bit too jerky and unnatural. This thing has got to her too. I can't help but think that's why my uncle seems to have forgotten about my dad's death. Maybe now it has another body, another life to consume. It's stronger somehow. And knowing this means I can't be sure who else it has taken over. I can't trust anyone now. I am recording this with the intention of sending it to every contact I have and posting it everywhere I can think of. I don't think I have much of a chance of getting away from this, especially now the police are searching for me. For those of you who know me and are receiving this, if you take nothing else from this message, remember this. I will not be coming home. I promise you now, if I ever return, it is not voluntarily. And if I do, be warned. The next time you see me, it won't be me anymore. For those seeing this online, I can only advise you be on your guard. This thing clearly can spread, and I don't know how or how fast. It may already exist elsewhere for all I know, but if not, it definitely will soon. So please, trust your gut. If a loved one miraculously returns from the dead, look for the signs that something is off, something inherently wrong about them. Look for the eyes that are too wide, or the smile that has too many teeth. Because chances are, if your instincts are telling you it's not human, it isn't.
Hello, Sinister listeners. If you've enjoyed this story, then you'll find all the author's information in the description below. For more content, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to succumb to the sinister.